Hey guys, welcome back. So today we are doing lab number 14, which is cell receptors. So we're going to talk about how cells communicate with each other. We're going to discuss the difference between a target cell and a non-target cell. So if you remember what receptors are, they are proteins found on the surface of cell membranes, and they help cells communicate with one another. So you're going to get the lab. I'm going to turn my document camera around, called Cells Receptor Laboratory. So this is what it looks like. Let me just adjust this so you guys can see it better. Make it a little bit bigger. And this is the lab we're going to do today. Okay, so this is lab number 14. And we'll start by reading the preliminary research as usual. Okay, so the purpose of today's lab is to understand how cell receptors work. So what are cell receptors? You should know from our notes this week, hopefully, that cell receptors are protein molecules embedded in the cell membrane, and they will attach to specific chemicals. Remember, it has to have the right shape. Once this specific chemical fits into the receptor, it will release a message to the cell's nucleus and instruct it to do something. Cell receptors are very specific, just like your house keys are specific to your front door. It can only work if the shape fits. The next several paragraphs of your document talk about different hormones and what type of cells they would bind to. So we're reading through many chemicals will bind to the cell receptors. Growth hormone, for example, will bind to bone cells, and the instruction is to increase in number. The male hormone testosterone will bind to cell receptors on muscle cells and tell them to increase in growth. The female hormone prolactin fits into breast cells and triggers milk production. The female hormone estrogen will bind to uterine cells and instruct them to produce cells that lie in the uterus in the event that pregnancy happens. This is where the developing embryo will grow. Some steroids are artificial hormones. So people taking steroids for muscle growth must be aware of the many negative side effects since they trigger cells to grow. Anytime you're telling your body to grow cells, that's dangerous because cancer is when cells grow uncontrollably. So you're forcing your body to make more cells. That could be an issue. So fertility drugs, for example, attach to ovary cells and they instruct them to make more egg cells. So people do it because they want to have a baby, but it could lead to cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer. So people are always a little bit concerned. Unfortunately, it may elicit ovarian cancer. So women who are most at risk and advised not to use fertility drugs are those who have family history of ovarian cancer. So if my grandmother died of ovarian cancer and I was taking fertility drugs to have a baby, I would be probably advised not to do it because I could have the genetic predisposition for ovarian cancer. Receptors are also important for the functioning of the immune system. So you have your T cells, T lymphocytes, or the immune cells. They have a receptor called the CD4, which we talked about when we read the article, What Can My Receptors Do For Me? And the immune chemical messages called interleukins bind here and send a message to either stimulate or suppress the immune system. Unfortunately, HIV can also bind at this receptor site and tell the cell to shut down. So the problem is that two things can fit into this one cell. If it's HIV, then it's going to cause your immune system to become weak and shut down. If it's an interleukin, it's okay. So that's the danger of being exposed to a virus. When the CD4 T cells have a count lower than 200 microliters, then the patient can develop AIDS. Okay, so what we're supposed to do in this lab here is you're supposed to cut out these shapes. See the testosterone, interleukin, growth, FSH, TSH, estrogen, prolactin, HIV, and adrenaline. All the hormones we just kind of mentioned at the beginning. But we're not going to do the cutting out and the pasting. So you're just going to match them and you're just going to write it in. So on the next page, the first two are these cells. So you need to figure out which message would fit into these receptors. So if you look at the shapes, you see that the first one is a square. So that would match the estrogen. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you what I'm doing on my lab. Estrogen is the name of the hormone. That's not the name of the cell, it's the name of the hormone. So I'm going to go to my document camera for a quick second so you can see what I'm doing. And you can see that I wrote estrogen here because typically I would have been cutting it out and pasting it in there. I need to know what type of cell is this. This is the cell. This is the receptor, this shape. Okay, so I'm just going to label it just so you guys know. You don't have to label it, but I just want you to see that this part here is the receptor. Okay, this part here is the receptor. Okay, just to kind of refresh, the receptor is found attached to every cell membrane. And this receptor that fits into the message is estrogen here. So this fit. Now I need to know, what kind of cell is this? What type of cell has a receptor that matches this exact shape? So what I need to do is go to the reading of the document and read up on estrogen. So I need to find estrogen in my reading. Here it is. And it tells me that estrogen, let me just get this out of here. I'm sorry about that. My email's coming here. Estrogen will bind to uterine cells. So that's the type of cell that it binds to. And the job is it instructs them to produce cells that line the uterus in the event that a pregnancy occurs. So the type of cell that accepts the message estrogen is a uterine cell. Here's your cell name, uterine cell. And the action, go back to my reading, is instructs the uterine cells to produce cells that line the uterus. Okay, so produce cells that line the uterus. And then we go on to the next one. So here's another cell. The receptor looks like this. So I need to go and look at the very last page of the lab, has the cells as well. So here's my possibility of cells. So you guys could flip back and forth. So I need to know what message, these are the hormones and messages, would fit into this receptor. So look at this shape. Now I'm going to find something that fits in there. And you could see that the growth hormone is the one that fits there perfectly. So the name of the message is the growth. And I'm writing this here because I would have cut it out and put it there. Now, what type of cell is this that it has the receptor that accepts this message? Go back to the front reading, find growth. Here it is. And it tells me it's going to bind to bone cells. What does it do? It tells them to increase in number or to grow. So the bone, the type of cell it will bind to is a bone cell. And the action to increase in number, or in other words, grow. Okay, so your job now is going to be to continue finding the correct message for these. You might notice that the next one has this weird shape, and more than one thing can fit into that weird shape. So that weird shape can fit more than one of these. So you pick the one that you want. It doesn't matter which one. Okay, so either interleukin or HIV, they both have the same shape that would allow it to fit. Okay, so when you pick one of those, you go back to the reading to find out what type of cell these things attach to. And here's your answer here would be the immune cells. And then you're going to read about whichever one you chose. So what you're going to do for the rest of the lab is, when we get back to the PowerPoint, is you're going to figure out which message goes with which of these cell receptors, and then tell me what cell it is and what the action is for all of these. Okay, so you're going to go back and forth, and then we're going to get into, and there's all your choices again. Then we're going to go into some conclusion questions. There were 3 messages that you could not use, so you're going to list those there. Which cell could have received 2 messengers and why? So I kind of just told you that a moment ago, that because of the shape, the immune cell was able to receive 2 messages. And based on that, why is that so dangerous? Why is that so bad? Well, because unfortunately, if HIV is the one that goes in, then that will shut you down your immune system. So go ahead and answer those questions. Then we're going to go into the next section. All of these answers you're going to get from the beginning paragraphs. If a woman adopts a baby, how could her doctor initiate her body to produce milk? So go back to the front and see if you can find a hormone that's job is to send a message to make milk. Then number 5 asks, what is cancer? Again, it's in the reading. And we talked about it a little bit. How could steroids trigger cancer? How could fertility drugs trigger cancer? Remember what cancer is? Cancer is when cells grow uncontrollably. So anytime you're asking your body to create more cells, that's always a danger. Which women, are at risk of getting cancer from fertility drugs? So we talked about that. If it's in your family, if a grandmother has it, if there's some family history. And then number 9, would breast cells be able to recognize the chemical message that's attached to a muscle cell? The only way to answer this is to go back to your pictures. I'll go to my document camera for a moment. One of these is going to be a breast cell, and one of these is going to be a muscle cell when we get to these pictures here. So I want to know if those cells can accept the same message, why or why not. Okay, so remember it's shape specific. So typically it can only fit in the message that it is the correct shape. So if they're not the correct shape, then that wouldn't be a match. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, then you've answered the first 9 questions. And now the last page, questions 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 are based on this diagram. Base the answers 10, 14 on the information below and your knowledge of biology. So this is about allergies. So what are histamines? And you just read a little reading and try to analyze the data. So a lot of bio is analyzing data. So we're talking about histamines, which are chemicals made by your immune system. They're used to defend your body from incoming foreign invaders, such as pollen, bee venom, dog hair, anything that would give you some sort of reaction. This is about pollen. It can bind to your cell receptors and release something called histamines. That's going to give you an allergic reaction. And the chart below shows a patient's histamine levels on different summer days. So this patient, look at the dates. That should say milligrams, not ng. I guess it's a typo both in the lab and on this PowerPoint. I'll fix it on the PowerPoint though. So if the date is June, the end of June, you can see which pollen types were higher for that person in the beginning of July, the middle of July, the middle of August, the end of August. So you could kind of see what types of pollen are affecting this patient at different parts of the summer. So the last few questions are just to explain what histamines are, how they're released, and which months does it have the highest grass, which month is the highest tree, which month is ragweed the highest, and which type of pollen is this patient most allergic to. And that's it. You've completed lab number 14, and that is it. Let's just minimize this. And that's it for today. So we have completed this lab. We talked about cell receptors. We talked about how cells communicate with one another. And we talked a little bit about the difference between a target cell and a non-target cell. So the target cell is the cell with the matching receptor to the messenger. A non-target cell would not have that same shape, so therefore it can't attach and it's not a target. And that's it. Okay, if you have any questions, always send me a message or chat. And that's it for today. All right, guys, until next time, we'll see you at the next video lesson.